Let's kick things off because we're at the noon Eastern mark. My name is Michael Goldberg. I'm our executive director for the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship here at Case Western Reserve University. Also, I'm an associate professor at the Weatherhead School of Management. It is great to welcome back to campus Elizabeth Almeida to our alumni speaker series. It's our sort of tradition here, as we've been doing these, to have student moderators, and we're thrilled that Ekta, who's in our full-time MBA program and it was a student of mine this past year, and doing a cool remote entrepreneurship internship with another great Weatherhead alum this summer, will be our moderator. We do encourage a lot of audience participation, so just let Ekta know if you're here on Zoom, just put something in the chat or raise your hand if you have a question that you'd like to ask Elizabeth, and we can call on you directly. And if you're watching on LinkedIn Live, just put a question in the comment and Doug and I will be monitoring. So Elizabeth and Ekta, thank you so much for doing this today. And Ekta, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Professor Goldberg. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ekta Khurana, and I'm a second-year MBA candidate for the class of 2022. I'm really excited to introduce Elizabeth Almeida. She's the owner of Fat Moon Farm, an organic gourmet of mushrooms. Her devotion to food, farming, family, and community is unbelievable. She learned to prepare and serve food in the early age, but it was in college when she learned the exact scientific practices to maximize her mushroom growing techniques. She's been at the forefront of justice, be that food, environment, or economic, and she continues to practice her values through her work at Fat Moon Farm. Today, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome her on the speaker series and to learn about her entrepreneurial journey and, most importantly, the story behind such an interesting name for her business. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Ekta. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Professor Goldberg, for hosting as well. And it's such a pleasure to connect with students and to come back to Case virtually and to speak with all of you, hear your questions, and to just share my journey and hopefully inspire some small part of your journey towards entrepreneurship. And as we get started, I just wanted to say hello to Caroline Tierney, who's joining us today. Caroline is one of my employees, and she is a student at UMass Amherst and studying business and marketing at UMass Amherst, and has worked for me off and on for several years. And so it's fun. She's now taking on in addition to harvesting mushrooms, she's doing a marketing internship with me this summer and helping me up my social media game and improve my website. So it's been a lot of fun to have her so thoroughly understand the production side of the business, and then to be able to help tell that story and elevate the social media aspect of my publicity. So welcome, Caroline. Thanks for being here with us. She's probably still looking frazzled from being in the humid mushroom room this morning.
Yes, thanks for having Elizabeth, everyone. Thanks for the intro.
Okay, well, as I start understanding the journey from Elizabeth and Caroline, I would like to inform all our listeners, as Professor Goldberg mentioned, please feel free to mention your questions either in the chat or use the raise hand button on your screen, and I shall call out your name. So without further ado, Elizabeth, we would like to hear everything about how this name came into the focus. It's such an interesting name.
Sure. So when I started my business about 10 years ago now, I knew it was going to have to do with food and agriculture. And I always loved the imagery of the moon, and it's such an iconic image in agriculture. However, harvest moon and full moon both seem so boring and plain and not very memorable. And my son was about 18 months at the time, and he and my husband would look out the window and look at the full moon. And of course, being so little, our son called it the fat moon. And then it just kind of stuck. And for me, it gives off the feeling of, it hints at agriculture with the name Moon, but it also, I think, conveys to people that we're not too serious. And whenever I call someone, I'm on the phone and they ask my farm name, it makes people smile, which to me is the right first introduction to the type of business I want to own. That, if the first interaction is a happy thought, a happy, curious thought for folks, then I like to evoke that to, start my introduction.
That's a really interesting idea. Now, as we heard that you have a lot of background in food and farming and growing up on a multi-generational cattle farm and to your first job as a catering server, please tell us about your passion towards the food industry in particular.
Sure. So I did grow up on a farm in Western Ohio in the town of Bellefontaine, and I grew up around beef cattle. But I always knew that wasn't quite my thing. And so when I went to Ohio State for my undergrad, I actually started in food science and technology. And through my entire college career at Ohio State, worked in a research lab where I did learn quite a bit of the science that I still use today to grow the mushrooms, to understand how to keep things sterile, how to do tissue cultures, how to track, how to run. I run small experiments in my business, and then to be able to, document and analyze the data that I get from my own internal experiments. Those are all skills I learned at Ohio State. But when I was working in the food lab, most of the people I worked with were going on to careers in like developing new food products, cake mixes, working for Nestle and large companies, and that never resonated with me. I remember thinking, how can I be worried about new cake mixes when there are people that can't afford a cup of rice? And so in college, I ended up doing volunteer work through my church in Eastern Kentucky. And then I spent an entire year in Appalachia after college, volunteering and being immersed in the culture and seeing the needs. And so from there, I think, I was working with the priests and brothers and nuns that I met through that, just seeing their dedication to working for justice. And so I took that with me from that, from my time in college and after college. And I've always had a sense of, using whatever I'm doing, wherever you are in life, you can be doing something to be working for justice. And that can be, you can be owning a business and making money and still working for justice at the same time. And so when my husband and I moved to Massachusetts, at that point, I wanted to start my own business. And the local food industry here in Massachusetts is really strong. The county I live in has the highest number of CSAs, that's community supported agriculture. So we have the strongest support of anywhere in the country, the strongest support for local agriculture. So I started growing just vegetables and selling that, but land is really prohibitive out here. The cost of land is prohibitive. And so when I gave up the land I was using, I was trying to figure out what to do next, but still wanted to be in agriculture and the local food system. And so I went through an exercise that I learned from Fred Colopy, one of my professors when I was at Case. I believe he's still there. And in his information systems class, he told us how he had spoken once to Frank Gehry, who designed the Peter B. Lewis building, and asked Mr. Gehry, how do you stay creative? And Mr. Gehry told him that he does an exercise where he takes a project he's done, removes one, or puts a limitation on one element and tries to recreate it. So I thought, if I take a project I've already done, which is growing food in a field, and put a limitation on it, take away the sunlight, how can I still be part of the local food system, and what could I grow? So at that time, my son, who was by then 5, loved mushrooms. And every time we go to the supermarket, I had learned this trick that you let your little kid pick anything they want from the produce section, and then they'll be more eager to eat their fruits and vegetables. So I go and I'd say, pick anything from here. He would always pick the biggest box of mushrooms. The funny thing is, I've never cared for mushrooms. But I would always buy them, because I thought, if that's what he wants, I will buy them, and I'd cook them, make sure he got them all on his plate at the dinner table. And so then I bought him a kit, one of those little kits that you see at Home Depot or in Whole Foods or something on, grow your own oyster mushrooms at home. So we bought that, we started tearing it apart, and really seeing how it was made. And then I started Googling and just learning a whole lot off Google and YouTube on how to grow mushrooms. So, and I like to tell people, if you ask the right questions, you can learn a heck of a lot on Google and YouTube. Like, it's amazing the amount of information that's out there if you're asking the right questions and know where to look. In fact, there were 2 mushroom growers, one in Texas and one in, I think, British Columbia, who had competing YouTube channels. And they were trying to get the bigger audience and probably monetizing their YouTube channels. So they were like nonstop posting videos for small growers about how to grow mushrooms. And so I would watch these, like all the videos, and I'd be watching behind them in the videos, not just listening to their words, but looking at their setups to see what kind of equipment they were using and to see how they had arranged things. So truly, if you have the desire to learn, with the internet, there's tremendous information out there.
Yeah, I'm sure people must be really trying to make the most of internet, but the way you put it, try to put your energy in the right areas and try to ask the right questions. I think that's the key. That's exactly how we need to explore that medium. That gets me to the next question, asking, what are some of the traits which are essential for entrepreneurship? While you've elaborated so much of the learnings that you've had at school, what are those key things that you would suggest anybody who wants to take up entrepreneurship, be that in food or any of their area of interest? What are the key traits that they should have?
So this morning I was just discussing with one of my employees how it always feels like, it feels like you have to be willing to live at the edge when you're an entrepreneur, because we're looking at how do we get to the next phase of growth for the business. And so I have to keep things moving forward, hiring enough staff, investing in enough growing supplies, and finding the market all at the same time. And so I have a goal of increasing my business another 30% this fall. And so I have the staff to do it. I have the supplies ordered to do it. And the third piece of that is to find the market, to sell those mushrooms. And so, if you're not comfortable with some degree of risk, because right now, I don't know, like I'm in a little, over my head with staff and supplies, but trusting that over the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks, I'll figure out where I will sell those mushrooms. And so I find that there's a tremendous amount of needing to be comfortable every day, living at that edge of uncertainty if you're going to keep your business moving forward. So I think, if you don't have the stomach for that kind of risk, then, maybe entrepreneurship isn't for you. But that's definitely something that I experience on a regular basis. I think the other aspect that's come up for me recently is being willing to learn and eager to work in multiple areas of your business. So as I expand, I need to improve my HR and the benefits I'm offering. So spending time going down that path of making sure that I have my HR keeping up with production and staffing levels. And this past month, I've had 3 inspections of my business, and it sounds scary, but it's really exciting because it means I'm growing, because there's organic inspections to be certain that I can keep using the organic label and that I'm doing everything that I say that I'm doing. And then I recently had an inspection with a distributor, which I'm growing to the point that I need to start getting my mushrooms to restaurants through a distributor instead of taking them myself. And so the distributor won't accept my mushrooms unless they do an inspection. So I had that last week. And then yesterday I had an inspection from the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture, also about food safety and compliance. And so these were all new things to me. The inspection process was new. The food safety documentation I had to go through is new. And, I could have said, I can't do it, I don't know how. But instead, I talked to these folks who do the inspections and I say, this is my first time. What do I need to do? What do I need to know? Do you have any templates I can use? And I assure them that I'm not hiding. Sometimes when folks go through these inspections, they're just trying to get by. But I go in with an attitude of eager to learn and an openness to learning and advice. And I've learned a tremendous amount in the last couple of months, just about food safety and getting myself to the next level. So I can distribute my mushrooms to even more restaurants. So I think an openness to learning and an eagerness to learning and, being okay with that uncertainty that I'm, plunging into something next week that I've never done before and I'm not quite sure how it's going to go, but that's all right. I'll figure it out and I'm sure I'll find the right helpful people along the path to help me, complete whatever task I need to do. So I think having that attitude of that you can figure it out, the confidence that whatever challenge comes, you'll figure it out. That's really essential if you're going to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I picked up 2 traits while you mentioned with one, you started with one about uncertainty. I also picked up the trait of zeal. If you have that passion and if you have that thing that I really want to expand my business and I want to know everything about it, you will put your feet into the water and see and learn everything, because that's the only choice you have and that's what you really want to do. At the same time, I'm going to pause for a moment and encourage all our listeners, whatever questions you have, please feel free to write in the chat or raise the hand, press the hand button, and then we can take it up from there. Oh, I see we have a question from Paul. Would you like to unmute yourself and say it out loud?
Sure, thank you. So interested in the topic and your farm. Can organic farming be profitable? And is that based on a certain level of scale in terms of the amount of crop that you produce, or are your motivations more community oriented?
Good question, Paul, because there is certainly an assumption that organic farming is less profitable or just not profitable and has to be done for more charitable reasons. My farm is profitable, and organic farming can be profitable. My experience has been that there is a degree of scale that you have to get to make it profitable, and that it's not necessarily about whether you're organic or not. I think that applies to nearly any business, that you get started and you're making, you make your first $5,000 or $10,000 and you think, oh yeah, I can do this. This is great. Look, I made money in the last couple of months. And then you realize, well, if I'm going to multiply that times 4 or times 10, oh gee, I don't have enough, hours in the day to do that, or I don't have enough, I can't do all that heavy lifting alone. You start running into issues, whether it's organic or not. And so in the past year, I have really focused on getting my business to the place that it's a full-time job for me. So I've been raising my kids and glad to have an entrepreneurial job that I could make my own schedule and be caring for the children, but they're at the age that they don't need me as much. And honestly, I'm ready for a full-time salary. And so now I'm on track. That's why I have plans to grow, expand production another 30% this fall. Because it is profitable and I can see, the path to getting there. But you go through these hurdles of, in the food business, there are USDA regulations about food safety. So every time you get to a new threshold, then it's another investment, in safety and tracking and all of that. So it can be profitable, but you keep hitting these, it may feel like a ceiling at certain points, but once you start seeing all right, that's just another hurdle to get over. And then I'm clear for the next, phase of expansion. So I hope that answered your question. You can do it, not necessarily easy, but no entrepreneurial enterprise is easy. It requires the same discipline in terms of the financial side of things to make it work.
Thanks, Paul, for the question. And Elizabeth for such a great answer. Now talking about, I want to touch a little bit on the uncertainty factor because I think it just picked up with me. COVID impacted a lot of businesses, and I'm sure it must have impacted yours. But we've got to know that you spin the whole story around and you navigated into the wholesale domain. Share with us in detail, how did you manage to turn the whole perspective of converting a limitation to a flourishing business opportunity?
Sure. So when COVID started, my customer base was about 85% restaurants. And so that disappeared overnight. And so I was left with a lot of mushrooms one weekend and trying to figure out who was going to eat these mushrooms. Fortunately, I've always worked in a limited way with retail outlets. So I have some boutique grocery stores. I work with a lot of local farms and farm stands. And so last year in March, the farm stands had very little on their shelves. And of course, I'm sure it was the same in Cleveland as here, where people were reluctant to go to the major grocery stores, although the major grocery stores had empty shelves. And so people were just panic buying whatever food they could find. And the farm stands didn't have much. So I was able to quickly repackage that food for individual, in small portions for individual consumers. I did panic buy, in the first week of the pandemic. I heard there might be a shortage of plastic or interruptions in the plastic supply chain. So I panic bought about a 2-year supply of packaging because I didn't want to be caught in a situation where I was able to grow mushrooms,
right?
Harvesting hundreds of pounds a week and no way to get them out to individual consumers. So I'm still working through that supply of packaging, but I don't regret that decision one bit to stock up. And now my hope is that as our restaurants are opening and people are more comfortable going back out to eat, that I can hold on to more of the sales that we made to direct, to the farm stands. I'm hoping we can hold on to a share of that business and add back the restaurants and grow in that way.
So that's really encouraging. Also, I would like to know that you're doing so well with mushroom. Do you have plans of diversifying to other food categories as well?
So because growing mushrooms is so different than any other vegetable and different than growing animals, I don't have plans to expand in that way. The only crop I would consider adding is microgreens because they are also grown indoors intensively and are a high value crop. So I would consider adding that. What I think about more for expanding my business, partly just growing more mushrooms. I could certainly be growing more and expand the business that way. There's a lot of innovation going on related to mycology and mushrooms. One exciting project has been using mycelium as packaging. So if we could get rid of polystyrene packaging and replace that with mushroom mycelium, that you grow out the mycelium, it can grow in any shape. And then if it's baked, then it's killed by heating it. And then that could be used, it could be grown in a molded fashion, like to fit around an iPhone or something. So I find that tremendously exciting. There's research going on related to mushroom leather and using, processing the mushrooms in a way that it could be a good leather substitute. More immediately in my business, the two places where I'm looking to expand are first a value-added product for the fresh mushrooms, so that weeks that I just have too many mushrooms, that I have a good prepared food product that's shelf stable. So the most popular one for mushroom farmers is mushroom jerky, and that you just season it and dehydrate it, and then you have a shelf-stable product. The other area where I'm looking to expand, I'm doing some experiments with my compost. So I'm working with a local restaurant that has several farmers. They have a 5-acre farm attached to the restaurant. And one of the farmers has a background in soil science. So we're trying to figure out how to take my waste, which is mostly sawdust and mycelium, and not just turn it into compost, but turn it into a high value organic compost. So typically compost is advertised with what nutrients are in it, the NPK, the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. But the organic farms are looking for compost that has more than that. They're looking for the diversity of microbial and fungal life, bacterial and fungal life in the compost. So this farm I'm working with, we've set up a recipe. So we're putting in a certain amount of my brown sawdust inputs and green weeds from their fields. And then with plans to be able to quantify what exactly is in that. And the first sample has shown that we have, this is very exciting, we have a high level of beneficial nematodes,
Wow.
which are little tiny worms that are the connection. They help digest the bacteria and fungus into bioavailable nutrients for the plants. So the presence of beneficial nematodes is really exciting. So that's an area where I hope to be able to expand in the short term. There are several mushroom farms near me, but nobody is really capitalizing on that mushroom compost as a waste product to be turned into a high value input for local organic farms. So that's in the near future to get that product figured out.
Well, we sense your excitement while you were elaborating on everything around innovation in this area. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat. But before I ask or let the people ask those questions, I have a very small and a very straightforward question. How do you keep yourself updated with all the trends which are happening in the business? How do you stay on top of it? Because as an entrepreneur, you're required to know about everything which is happening in your area, right?
Right. So there's not really a good central place for us really small mushroom farmers, but I have found a really good Facebook group, and we're all like, people share information in there, what substrate are you growing on? What's happened? I tried this, and I had this problem this week, but here was the solution. What are you guys using for packaging? So the nuts and bolts that we discuss quite a bit in that group. And then Penn State University does quite a bit of research on mushrooms. So I do occasionally peruse their research to see what's coming out of Penn State. Most of the mushrooms in the US are grown in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. So Penn State has a motivation and funding to do research about mushrooms. I would say the other thing is the Facebook group I'm in, the folks there have tried just about everything. And so they're very quick to tell you when some idea you have is a dumb idea. Somebody else has probably already tried it. So they're quick to share that knowledge too, which of course is really beneficial to move on from a bad idea and, try something that might actually work.
Yeah, well, thanks. I think our listeners would have taken down the notes of the Facebook and the Penn University research and all. And let's see, let's start with the questions. We have a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure.
Robert, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Elizabeth. Yeah, the packaging, I've heard of that before, and it seems so natural. I'm surprised it hasn't gained strength yet, but I guess there's probably a large bubble wrap and styrofoam contingency that that pushes.
Like not to happen. Yeah, that's the kind of thing I would love to find somebody who wants to work on this, since I've figured out how to grow mycelium and how to grow mushrooms, but I know it's in a different direction. So if anybody on this call has an interest in that project, please reach out to me, because I would love to collaborate on something like that.
The other question I had is psychedelic mushrooms in medical use. It's starting to gain strength. Are you avoiding that area, or are you looking into it at all? There's controversy around it, but it has shown, again, some initial promises. I think Ann Arbor, Michigan has legalized some stuff, and there's some stuff with university up there that's taking a look at it. And I was just curious, in your category, is that something that you're looking at?
I'm aware of it. I know several states out west have legalized the psychedelic mushrooms. I think it's exciting to consider if we could use it, especially for medicinal use. I think, like marijuana, if we can provide people some relief, especially people with, experiencing extreme pain or anxiety, depression, if we can provide treatment, I don't see why not. I know it gets a little bit harder when we get into recreational use, same with marijuana. How do we, support people in the right way, ensure the legality, even though I think one of the struggles with marijuana and with mushrooms is quantifying the active ingredients. So research needs to be done so that there's a consistent product and people know what they're actually ingesting. So I think it's an exciting opportunity, especially for the medicinal use. It's probably, what I hear, it's probably coming everywhere. I'm not actively involved in any of the groups here in Massachusetts that might be working on it, but I think there's, I think we can all see the bigger societal movement related to marijuana and mushroom use. And then the next step will be for us as a society to figure out, how do we manage that? Do we want to, and how do we do that? If it comes to Massachusetts, I will already know how to grow mushrooms, and those are not particularly challenging to grow. I know of other folks who are growing them. So I'm mostly just paying attention to it, but I haven't engaged with that movement.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I was surprised it came up, and then I heard it on another NPR or something for non-addictive painkillers, that type of stuff, and also for PTSD, that it's in some studies it's done as well as other antidepressants. It's early though. It's old for Chinese medicine maybe, but early for Western medicine. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Jonathan, would you like to go next? Oh, okay. Well, I can ask his question. So his question was, what are the most common substrates used for inoculating or growing edible mushrooms?
So the most common substrate that farmers are using is red oak sawdust. So mushrooms are usually happy on hardwood sawdust, but in particular red oak. And the second most common, I would say, is wheat straw. So that the mushrooms that are being grown, there are two different categories of mushrooms. So portobello mushrooms, white button mushrooms, cremini mushrooms, those are all in the family Agaricus, and they grow on composted cow manure in the dark. And the mushrooms that most of us local farmers are growing are mushrooms that grow on cellulose in the light. So, sawdust is highly efficient. You can use some coffee grounds. They're not as efficient. They're quite acidic, so you don't get the best yield on those. And then straw, and then looking around at whatever other forms of cellulose you have in your local area. So that might soon become waste from marijuana businesses. That waste could be put back into the mushroom industry. What I find exciting, another area of research that I would love to find a partner on, is using mushrooms to recycle dirty cardboard. So right now you cannot put pizza boxes into cardboard recycling because the oil stains are a problem when they're processing that into new cardboard. And so there's this whole category of cardboard that has to be put into the landfill. Well, oyster mushrooms have been proven to break down oils. So if we could use oyster mushrooms to decompose the cardboard, we could then generate a compost that could be used for landscaping rather than putting this cardboard into landfills. So I find that to be a really exciting opportunity. And similarly, Paul Stamets, who's the guru of mushrooms, did research about using mushrooms to clean up an oil spill, using oyster mushrooms to clean up an oil spill. And so I take that knowledge and combine it with the fact that the EPA is having increasingly stringent rules about wastewater or stormwater for local communities. So I've recently finished a 3-year term on our town select board. It's like the city council. And we were passing new funding to deal with stormwater management. Now, all the street sweepings are considered dirty waste that has to be disposed of in a special landfill. So if we could figure out a way to use oyster mushrooms to clean up that trash from the street sweeping so that we didn't have to, cap it in the landfill, I find that really exciting, a really exciting potential use of mushrooms to help clean up the environment.
Well,
I think I may have gotten off topic there, but different substrates, and thinking about, mushrooms beyond just growing them to eat, but how can we use them for some environmental remediation as well?
Yeah. And Katie, you're up next. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes. So I've been actually wondering, so how do you, as a small mushroom farmer, how do you grow any mushrooms that require logs or like trees? And if you don't currently do anything like that, do you plan to or have any idea of how you would?
So a lot of the mushrooms we grow do grow on trees. So I grow oyster mushrooms, which grow on trees in the wild here in New England. And sometimes I see them when I'm hiking around here. And so the way we've been growing those is to grow them on sawdust. So it's the same idea, same substrate, but just ground up with a lot of surface area so you can control the process and it can happen a lot faster than inoculating a tree outside. There are other mushrooms that grow on trees around here that we haven't quite figured out an efficient way to grow them. So for example, oyster mushrooms take about 7 days to grow in my grow room. If I tried to grow, there's a mushroom, maitake mushrooms, which is a desirable edible mushroom. They take closer to 3 months in a grow room. So that's one that not many producers are cultivating indoors because it takes so much time and space to grow those when you could turn over several cycles of oyster mushrooms in that time. So I think, did I answer your question sufficiently, Katie?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know that the log tree mushrooms could grow in the sawdust. I thought it was like one or the other. So
Okay, up next is Jason. You had your hand raised.
I had a question, and maybe I don't know if you would know the answer right now with your stage of your business, but kind of operationally, do you guys produce year round and have full-time employees? And if not, is that something you think you'll have in the future? And I'm asking, my parents are vegetable farmers with a market, and we've been extremely busy, especially with the pandemic. And I'm debating quitting my job, but that's a big hang up when you only grow for 6 to 8 months of the year. How do you hire full time for in farming, hire somebody full time to do work? Is that something you've experienced?
Yes, and actually before, excuse me, before I answer for my business, Jason, I want to mention some friends out here who farm, and they live up near Gloucester, quite near the ocean. They have figured out an incredible farming model where they grow all season and they only sell in the winter. So they do not go to any farmers markets. They only grow storage crops and livestock and grains. And so during the winter, they have an incredibly loyal following of folks that will drive to them, and they're open once a month, and you have to pre-order, and you're ordering like 20-pound bags of carrots, 10 pounds of cabbage, units of 5 butternut squash, like larger quantities of food. And so now they offer my mushrooms, and I think they have 80 members, and we always sell out. Like at least the first 60 members buy everything that I, well over 100 pounds that I've set aside for them. And we do that all winter. So anyway, I really admire their model, Jason, because they've figured out how to take farming, which we think of as working twice as hard for 6 months of the year and then not as much work in the winter, they have figured out a way to separate the production time from the sales and distribution time in a way that's really working for them, and that they've really captured a segment of the market there. And then for the mushrooms, they can be grown year round. When I started, I was growing them in the woods, on pallets outside my house. But then I really wanted to get to year round production. So I moved into a mill building about 3.5 years ago, and I do grow year round. And actually the only season I'm not growing right now is I take off the month of August, because what I didn't account for was how hot mill buildings get. And the mushrooms are not happy when it's 90 degrees in the mill building. And I can't seem to run enough air conditioning to manage that. So I've actually kind of flipped it on its head, and I take off the month of August, which as a farmer feels like a big coup that I can be a farmer and I can still go to the beach as much as I want in August. And I'm not worried about, being there to pick tomatoes. And honestly, people don't eat as many mushrooms in August. I find that the farm stands are full of, zucchini and eggplant and tomatoes, and we're all, sweet corn. We're also excited for those summer vegetables for, the 3 months or so that we get them. And so people don't really miss me. And then when I come back in September, the people who did miss me, like, they start buying right away. So I find that my sales, I hit the ground running from September 1st, instead of like suffering through the slump in August and then like waiting for it to gradually pick up. So that's working for me. I do have a few customers that are unhappy with my August holiday, but it's all right. Like, if I have 3 or 4 unhappy customers out of, 50, I'll take it, and I'll head to the beach with my kids for a few days and enjoy that season. So, and then in terms of full-time, Jason, I'm very excited to say that this morning I made, and this is probably even news to my employee, Caroline, made my first commitment to my first full-time employee. I have a gal that's been wanting to come work for me, and I really had to get to that level. That's part of my ambitious plans for growing this fall. So I have full-time employee scheduled starting in September, and then increasing production. And then the only thing that's left is to do the hustling to make sure that we have the sales there to support the increased production and increase in payroll. So really, that's just something else I would mention, that in terms of justice and my motivation for being an entrepreneur. I think one of my favorite parts of being an entrepreneur is giving people a paycheck. And that may seem funny that that's what I love, is, handing out checks. But, there's dignity in work, and dignity in having a good job, a job where you're treated fairly and treated respectfully. And so that's really part of my motivation of being an entrepreneur, is to provide more jobs. And, I'm able to provide jobs from, this woman who will work for me full-time. She's at that point in her life where she needs full-time employment. And then I have Caroline, who's on here, who we managed to make things work around her college schedule. And I have, a woman who's in her 50s, and she wants a small part-time job that's low stress. And she says, picking mushrooms is really relaxing. Nobody's talking to her and nobody needs anything. And she comes in and works independently. She comes to work at 5:30 in the morning. So I really like being able to provide jobs that fit where people, what people need. I'd like to be able to pay more, but that's part of the bigger, that's an issue within our bigger food system in terms of what wages are. And I can try to do my part, but that's a huge system that I hope to be part of changing, and discussing what the impact is of all the low wages across the system, the food system.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We have another question from Kaylin. Would you like to ask your question? Did I say the name right?
Oh, Salon.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
So, I have a question about marketing and digital content. I was just wondering if you do have a current marketing strategy, like if you need one. And I've also seen a mushroom grower. I think he's in Phoenix, and he records a lot of his process, and he posts like weekly videos on a YouTube channel. And I'm pretty sure that's another avenue of making money through digital content, of just like recording like current processes and building a following that way. I was just wondering if you ever considered starting a YouTube or a TikTok channel and using those as a way to market your business and expanding your sales?
Sure. So I do some social media. You can find me on Instagram, Fat Moon Mushrooms, and same with Facebook, Fat Moon Mushrooms. I haven't done much on LinkedIn. I haven't found a lot of people on LinkedIn hanging out waiting to buy mushrooms. I have not gotten into TikTok, and I have a little bit on YouTube. So my experience is that I could spend 80 hours a week doing social media. And so I'm really asking the question of what is my goal here? What am I looking to get out of this? And I have not gone down the road of monetizing content online. So part of it is, just as I said, I built my business by watching other people's YouTube channels. I have not felt compelled to give away all my information and, in that way. And I know I've seen other people's YouTube videos, and I know to make effective videos, it's work. It's, to edit them and to stage them correctly and to, be focused about it. I don't underestimate the amount of time that it takes to create digital content. And so I do have, in the winter, I did work with a marketing firm that helped give me direction to, we did a new website, how to tell a story, how to, focus the messages, and went through an exercise of imagining and describing all of our target customers, and then making sure that each social media post or email is written to one of those customers that we've described. And so I've recently started selling mushroom grow kits online that can be shipped anywhere in the US. But there are other folks in that space as well. And some of them have really beautiful content. And so I recognize their business is quite a bit about creating that content and sales through that content. So what I've been doing is focusing more on being the biggest presence in the mushroom world here in New England, because I sell at so many farm stands around here, and I do have a following. I've gotten local press. So I've really been focused this year on how do I make sure that as many people as possible in New England know who I am and recognize my mushrooms, and build the business from there geographically, instead of positioning myself as the content leader on YouTube for growing mushrooms, because I see there's already competition there. I have had people call me and say, can I come by and see your place? I want to start growing mushrooms. I live 10 minutes away. Can I come by and see how it's done? And so I came up with the answer that I will give a 2-hour consult for $600, and I'll show you everything. I'll tell you everything. And I promise I will show you $10,000 worth of mistakes and bad equipment purchases. I have a graveyard of bad equipment purchases. I will gladly show you my graveyard and tell you why each of those pieces of equipment didn't work. And seriously, in 2 hours, I can easily show you $10,000 of mistakes. So I feel like $600 is a fair price, and I've had a few people accept it. Other people, there's a whole thing within the mushroom growers online that because it's supposedly so easy and there are free YouTube channels out there, a lot of people expect any mushroom farmer to be willing to give away all their information if they're asked. People assume that they can call you up and visit your farm and ask you whatever they want, and you will do this for hours for free. I have another person who's starting growing mushrooms that I help, and I supply him with the grow blocks, and I mark those up from what I pay. I mark them up, and it's actually worked out to be a great arrangement because I'm making a little money. I spend time with him and give him advice, but I'm okay with that because it's working for both of us. So anyway, that was my long answer to social strategy and media strategy and whether or not I want to create a YouTube channel about growing mushrooms.
Well, thank you so much. And we call it a wrap. And thanks to everyone for participating today and making it such a lively session. Thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing insights and making food and justice blend so well. And now I'll turn it over to Professor Goldberg.
Great. Ekta, thank you for moderating. It's great to see you again. Look forward to getting you in class in person this fall. Elizabeth, thank you for doing this. It's a great Privileged to hear your entrepreneurial journey. I love your reference to my colleague Fred Colopy. I will tell him he is semi-retired, but still an amazing presence on our campus and our school. And
Oh, he was wonderful.
I will tell him that he was referred to today. I know he'll get a kick out of that. And look forward to welcoming you back to campus soon. We'd love to have you back in Cleveland. Obviously, there's a number of folks, including folks on this call, that are interested in topics like social entrepreneurship and access to food. I did put a link in the chat to some of the work that our Sweatland Center is doing here. Darcy Friedman in our School of Medicine is doing some really interesting academic and practical work as it relates to access to food and food deserts like we have here in Cleveland. So love to introduce you to some folks. We do have some upcoming events we're a little slower in the summer, but we've got some the next couple of weeks. So we'd love to see folks back. And again, thank you everybody for joining. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for taking the time to come back to campus today.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to chat with everyone.
Great. See everybody soon. Take care.
Bye.